Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bonjour à tous. We're starting today's Transit Commission meeting by telling the stories of two inspirational OC Transpo employees. You'll hear how they placed the needs of others above their own, and as a result, helped prevent serious incidents from occurring. The first story took place in December 2017, and the second story occurred this past January. This acknowledgement is part of the TransSecure program, which is a well-established community watch program on wheels. OC Transpo employees look out for the safety of all community members, and as a result, become the eyes and ears of the community. They notify emergency services when required and assist individuals who are in distress. Une telle reconnaissance fait partie intégrante du programme TransSecure, un service mobile de surveillance communautaire bien établi. Les employés d'OC Transpo veillent à la sécurité des membres de la communauté, de sorte qu'ils sont les yeux et les oreilles de la communauté. Ils avisent les services d'urgence aux besoins et aident les personnes en détresse. In the early hours of Sunday, December 3rd, bus operator Safe was driving on Route 95 approaching Saint-Laurent when a female approached him stating that she was going through a difficult time. The female admitted to Safe that she had attempted suicide earlier that evening, and her arms had numerous cuts on them. Safe immediately notified the Transit Operations Control Center for assistance and aided the young woman by giving her bandages to stop the bleeding. A transit special constable arrived soon after and provided further first aid support until an ambulance arrived on scene. The female was then transported by the ambulance to the local hospital to receive further treatment. Thanks to Safe's compassion and ability to react in a stressful situation, the woman was able to receive the assistance and care she needed. And during the early afternoon of January 16, bus operator Frank was completing Route 7 on Rideau Street when he noticed a man in distress. The man appeared to be crawling across Rideau Street and urgently needed help. Frank immediately pulled over and proceeded to help the man get safely aboard his bus. He then called the Transit Operation Control Center for support. Paramedics arrived shortly thereafter and provided the medical assistance the man required. Thanks to Frank's immediate action and calm approach, the man received the care and was saved from a dangerous situation. Unfortunately, Frank is not able to attend this morning, but I'm very happy that Safe is here with us on a very busy day, and I'd like to have him join me at the podium. Your compassion and quick actions demonstrate the TransSecure program, what the TransSecure program stands for, and also reinforces OC Transpo's continued commitment to the safety and security of our customers and the entire Ottawa community. Thank you very much for everything you do. I've got a certificate here for you. Well, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Transit Commission meeting for the 18th of April. This is Agenda 28 for this session of Council. Aussi, on a la traduction disponible pour les médias francophones ou les résidents francophones qui ont besoin. We will begin with any declarations of interest. Seeing none. Confirmation of the minutes 27 from the 21st of February 2018. Carried. Thank you. Communications, we have responses to inquiries, contingency planning for the closure of LRT stations in the cases of emergency, and routes 12, 7, and 6 bus cancellation rates. Councillor Nussbaum.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chairman, I was hoping to lift the second inquiry just because Councillor Fleury and I just had a couple of quick follow-up questions.
So thank you. We do have to vote on that to put on the agenda. The threshold is 2/3. Is there consensus to add this to the agenda? Carried. Thank you very much. Item number 1 of the agenda, status update, Transit Commission motions and inquiries for the period ending 11 April 2018. Is this item received? Received. Item number 2, general accounts, transit write-offs 2017. That the Transit Commission received this report regarding write-offs of $74,295 of the 2017 general accounts as required by the Delegation of Authority bylaw. Carried. Oh, very quickly, Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you. It is a good number in percentage terms. Just wanted to inquire either with the general manager or maybe revenue is the place for this to be asked. But what is the agreement? I note in the report that sometimes it goes to collection. What is the agreement with collections, and how much do we pay for that service in percentage terms?
Through you, Chair, we do have agreements with 3 collection agencies, and they complement city services. And what happens is when that debt is uncollectible at the city, is sent out to agency, and then the rate that they charge is added on to the collection amount that's owed. That is under the Municipal Act. We have the authority to do that. And what that means is that the city doesn't pay any extra for those services.
Okay. The customer ends up paying.
They do, yes. And we communicate that as part of our process, so they are well aware in terms of what those consequences could be.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Is item number 2 carried? Carried. Thank you. Item number 3 is Commissioner's report from Commissioner Crew. And so, Commissioner, would you like to speak to it, or? Okay, Commissioner Crew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank staff for their assistance in helping me to draft this motion. I would certainly like to thank Mayor Watson as well for his leadership on this issue. When Quebec passed Bill 62 into law, immediately on October 25th, apparently without prompting from council, the mayor wrote a very strongly worded letter to Premier Couillard saying that OC Transpo and their drivers will not take steps to enforce the so-called religious neutrality law. One possible interpretation would have our bus drivers providing service to people wearing religious insignia as our buses operate in Quebec. And as much as the mayor took strong leadership on this issue, something like this should not be left up to the whim of an individual mayor. And at some point, presumably, in the future, it doesn't appear like it's going to be soon, Mayor Watson may no longer be the mayor of Ottawa, but something like this should not even be left up to the whims of the electorate. That is exactly the purpose of the charter. So in order to take what the mayor wrote by letter and make it policy of this commission, I wanted to support this motion, again, suggesting as the motion reads, but that it be it resolved that the Transit Commission for the City of Ottawa will remain committed to equality and diversity and will continue to provide OC Transpo's transit services in a manner that respects the fundamental freedoms guaranteed to all by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I do note that this comes one day after the anniversary of the Charter, so I think it's an appropriate motion, and I think it makes it policy of this commission, something the mayor has already expressed will be our operating procedure. Those would be my comments, and I would urge everyone, of course, to support the motion.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Crew. Councillor Wilkins.
Yeah, I just want to remind the Commission, we actually have an equality and inclusion policy in the city that was passed more than 10 years ago, I guess now, and if you remember when, I don't know if you were on the board when we did this, but when we had the major changes in routes a few years back, and they were doing a year later doing an evaluation of the impact on people. On the behalf of COWI, the Citizen for All Women Initiative, I put a motion forward to make sure that we use that policy in looking at those, which the staff did do. And they came back and said it really worked well, and we're always going to use it. So I take this as it's not a new policy, we already have it as a confirmation, and I have no problem doing that, and I'll be supporting your motion, because I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that these policies exist, but sometimes we don't pay enough attention to them. And I think it's really important that we don't let people know we're just doing this now. In fact, it's been involved, with the city for some time, and it's been reinforced again a bit this year. And certainly the city manager, I know in January, sent out an memo to all managers saying, we have this lens, and you should be using it, and it includes, it's called equality and, if I remember right, equality and equity and equality. And if you want to see what that policy that says, it's on the city website. You can look it up and take a look at it. I think sometimes we forget about it, and that's where we need to be reminded. This does that, and thank you for doing that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, is item 3 carried? Carried. Thank you very much. There are no in-camera items, so we got to go to the new item 4, which I guess is the response to the inquiry TTC 0718 on routes 12, 7, and 6. Councillor Nussbaum.
Chair, do you mind if I go first? Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the response. First and foremost, I want to say that we've been working with staff and senior management on this for some time, and I can appreciate the complexity of the network and some of the challenges. I have seen statistically we're seeing improvements, but for what I'll call a neighborhood route that goes through Tim's area, Toby's area, and mine, it is an important connection. I'd love to hear maybe a little more on the issues of construction, because you address in the response some of the construction impacts on those cancellation. And maybe you could give us a bit of intel as to the definition of what these cancellations truly mean, right? Like, I think that I certainly didn't appreciate, a bus that's canceled to me was very simple, but I guess there's some complexities there. So maybe we can start by just getting some of that context out there.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, and I know we've chatted numerous times on this, and I think some of the key things that you need to think about are you are at the peak of detours. It's full-on detours for the LRT construction, and when you overlay other construction activities, such as O'Connor, such as what is coming with Elgin, it touches into point number 2, which is you made a decision to go to an interline system many, many years ago. That was the wise decision. If you didn't have an interline system, that means, just for clarity, a bus starts off as a certain route and can turn into another route, go through the city and deadhead and so forth. If you didn't do that, I can assure you your tax rates would be much, much higher, or your fares would be much, much higher, or you'd have less service. So you're at the peak of construction for LRT and detours. You have major other projects that impact any bus route, and I can tell you I've had the same discussions with suburban councillors, and I've worked with Councillor Kakish on some of his issues, and Councillor Harder and so forth, because the system is fragile in that a route that is a number 12, a 7, or 6 used to be another route just a few hours before, and if it was caught in traffic, it can't get out to the suburban route or can't get to its next trip. There is very, very frequent service in these 3 routes that you have. Other areas that are affected don't have the frequency that you have. And then we're into bucket number 3, which is the control center that you've seen does literally thousands of adjustments through all the technology that we have there to fill as many trips as we can. So while you see these cancellations, there's others that could potentially become cancellations that we've saved those trips and we've done adjustments. And this morning I took a little bit of a spin through a part of Route 12 just to experience it firsthand. And I can tell you, it's very, very simple to see where the squeeze points are, and they're fragile routes. It will get better with LRT, but I also want to manage those expectations. As you and I have chatted, some of this is not atypical, and I emphasize the A part, of downtown core bus operations that get intermixed with traffic. And so if you go to New York, Toronto, any downtown urban areas, you're going to see these types of impacts on service. So that's not to say that we accept it. We achieve very, very high standards, and we will continue to do that. So the service will improve. It's at the peak of its peak in terms of being fragile in terms of impacts. We are very conscious of what the customers are saying, and we are working, as you know, on Route 12. We've got some ideas that we're going to share with you in due course in terms of some possibilities to improve things. And then there's also some environmental assessments that are out there. I know that we're working in Councillor Tierney's ward, and Councillor Nussbaum is looking at expanding some things with an upcoming EA and so forth that will help all of this, along with all of the other systems that you're doing in terms of BRT and LRT investment.
So I mean, the statistics kind of put everything in context, which is that the 12 seems to always be in the top 5 in the last 6 months of cancellation. Our overall cancellations fluctuate. This is citywide on a monthly basis. I mean, we've gone in May of 2017 at about 1,400 cancellations to, 1,800 cancellations to just in February down to 300. So we see a range of fluctuations in cancellations on a monthly basis. And, you know, I have to say that stat was interesting to me as it seems to be trending down. So there's some network stabilization that's happening overall. But that said, I think that the 12 keeps capturing about 4% of those cancellations, no matter the fluctuation on the overall cancellation. So I'd love to see, and I can respect that all the scheduling's done and all the interlining is a complex, because when you start moving one piece, it moves the other. But and there are direct things that Troy has done in the control room and so on. You know, it's going to sound weird, but I'm less concerned around a bus that's a bit late. I'm more concerned around a bus that doesn't come, right? Like, if someone's at a bus stop waiting to go into work, or needing to pick up a child at daycare or whatever, coming back from downtown, going back into our communities, it's a challenge, right? We collectively want to make bus usage a lifestyle. And when you start creating these situations where it's not just a delay or life planning, it's actually impacting their livelihood, it's challenging. So I'd love to hear what interim measures we can put in place. I recognize that the opening of light rail, even if you don't change anything, the interlining algorithm changes and the impact on routes changes. You've explained that to me in the past, and I can see the light there. But I think there's got to be something that can be done, especially on the morning peak, which when with your folks, when we narrowed into that, there's some situations in around 7 to 9 that are challenging. So I'd love to hear what you could do then.
So again, at sort of the macro level, I just want to be candid on this. It's I don't look at 1%, 2%, 4%. The goal should be 0, because if your bus gets canceled and you're at the bus stop, you really don't care if it's 99.9 or what. Your trip got canceled. That is what everyone in that control room is striving for, and everyone in the organization is striving for, is 0 cancellations. Having said that, it's not a perfect world, and we can't always achieve that, particularly on challenging days like we've had in the last couple of days. With respect to the 12, we're looking at everything under the hood in terms of possibilities, in terms of, we've discussed with you some of the transit priority lanes, we've discussed with you some of the signal timing adjustments, we've got Phil Landry and his team looking at it, we've got VVG looking at it in terms of all those things. So that list is being compiled, and we're going to be sharing that with your office in terms of that, and we will look to you for help in terms of communicating that out to some of the businesses that may be impacted and the residents themselves.
Just finally, Mr. Chair, I respect what you're saying, and I'm glad to work with you on those priorities. I think the challenge is and I'm using the morning example because I think it's the one that hits home directly, is when if that bus doesn't pass. If it's late, it's a different issue, but if it doesn't pass, we all know full well that then capacity becomes an issue for the following trips, and that compounds itself and creates a very intense transit experience for all, right? For the bus driver that's feels that he wants to pick up the drivers, but there's no room in the bus, and so on with the transit user itself. So, is there an opportunity to narrow in on that morning peak challenge? And see if there is additional capacity elsewhere to stabilize that morning commute on the 12th?
The answer is yes, we've done that. We can't adjust right now, but as we do the quarterly updates, that's what we do across the system. And we're very fortunate in that this commission and City Council has continued to fund large capacity buses, the Arctics and the double deckers, which are really helpful in terms of if we can squeeze in additional trips to address the capacity issue. The other thing that we look at very, very careful is the bunching. We don't want back-to-back buses with one vacant and one full. So that's where Troy and his team make the adjustments on that. So yes, as part of the quarterly updates, we are looking at that. Pat has that on his list with Troy to look at it on these routes and all the other routes that are sensitive also.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the fact this was brought up. We share MPs and we share MPPs and we share Route 12. So there's a lot of things we share. That being said, I remember when it was the 2 and it was like the milk run from hell, and now it's down to Route 12, which is good news. I think you're seeing the same pinch points I do, especially I don't know how the operators are masterful in skill going down Jasmine Crescent when the snow banks are piled up in the side and cars are in the middle of the street. It's amazing that they get through there. But I'm looking at the bigger picture. I think our first go at light rail is going to be absolutely amazing, but I think stage 2 is the big game changer from my perspective. And I look at Montreal Road Station. The amount of people I bump into all the time and say, you know, that's going to be a hub. That's going to change things. So, and then you look at Blair Road with the Transportation Master Plan coming up in 2019, major opportunities to change things. I just want to make sure that we're going to be out there, and I'm certain I know the answer already, to inform the public about a lot of these things, that there is going to be change. Every time I bump into someone and say, yeah, stage 2 light rail from Blair down out east is going to be in the middle of the highway, they go, what? But I have no clue. So part of my role is I'm pushing it out there. I'm trying to get the message out there. Is there going to be a campaign to say, yes, stage 1 is going to be great. Overall, the routes are pretty much the same. There'll be some minor adjustments. But stage 2 is going to be the big game changer.
I'll start with stage 1. Stage 1 will definitely, as you say, change the game in very positive ways, in that the key message, which the Ready for Rail campaign, which Ms. Bégin and her team are managing, now that we know the target month for the launch, we're going to be amping that up. We will be flooding the community with information incrementally and strategically about those key messages. In the east, if I could just use that, it'll basically say every bus will take you to Blair, and you can transfer over there seamlessly, and you don't have to tap again, and all those things. So absolutely, Ready for Rail campaign is coming. And then as we get closer to launch date, we will obviously be informing this committee as to what all those logistics and details look like if we get to where we need to in terms of November. But stage 1, in essence, both from a customer transfer point, but also from a bus reliability point, is those buses that are now streaming through the downtown and have to deadhead and get to, will no longer be doing that. They'll be predominantly staying in the east end or in the west end or in the south. There'll be some crosstown trips, as you know, but that's where the stabilization and the help, and as you expand to stage 2 and stage 3, absolutely, that just grows incrementally.
And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. So on that, obviously, you know, like I said, stage 1, you're right, no deadheading, that's great news. Now buses are a little more localized. Knowing the length of route that Route 12 takes, it's really hard to localize that one in stage 1. But in stage 2, I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussion, consultation with the public about the opportunities of saying, well, do we need the 12 to start here and go all the way through here when you have a station literally right beside it?
The exact same process we did on stage 1 is Pat and his team will look at the network-wide impacts and opportunities and retool the routes, not to the extent you've done on stage 1 because it's the most significant, but absolutely, and they'll look at all those connection points.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all have bus route problems. I've spent many hours with OSU Transport, had them out for meetings, etc. It's one thing in the downtown when you have frequent service and you have a 10 or 15 minute service, so you get cancellation. When you have a 30 or 1 hour service, as I have in some of my routes, it becomes absolutely critical. And there are a lot of serious problems because we have a lot of problems with our roads. We have a lot of problems with access. We have problems all the things that have been mentioned. And I don't bring them every time I have them to this committee because I would be here every meeting. But I work heavily with OSU Transpo, and they do everything they can to improve the situation. Start off having 21,000 people working the business park and no bus service at all. We now have bus service. It's not ideal, but it has meant that some people can get to work, because not everybody works downtown. And we have a system, Mr. Chair, that we have to take a look at. It's very much geared to getting people downtown in the morning and back at night. I have people in my ward who live in Canada North and work in Canada North. If they want to take the bus, it'll take them an hour and a half, and they'll have to have 3 different buses which run every 30 minutes, which is why it takes an hour and a half.
Councillor, I
So I just want to just say
let's
that,
keep it to routes 12
yes,
and
I
6
understand what the councillor is talking about with this particular one, but I want to just reiterate, I know Bow Street Transport is doing the best they possibly can with the resources that we've given them. I hope it will improve with light rail, but some of us aren't getting light rail, and so that it becomes, my people are complaining that when the light rail opens, it will take them longer to get to work. They're worried about having 600 people in one station all trying to change to the...
Councillor, we're talking about routes 12, 7, and 6. We're talking about routes 12, 7, and 6. So we're going to move, Councillor, if you're not speaking about routes 12, 7, and 6, we're going to move on to the next speaker. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the response. Councillor Fleury asked a number of questions that I was going to get to, but just a couple of quick follow-ups. One of the things that he noted, which I think is great news, and we didn't have the statistics when I put the inquiry first initially, is the total number of cancellations has dramatically decreased. If you look at February 2018, we're down to 246. According to the official statistics, compared to May of, I guess the highest was March of 2017, which was 1797, which is good news. I think it's important to note that. I'm just curious, is there some reason why that happened? Is there an explanation for, I mean, is this a trend line that we can now feel confident about, or is it variability and we shouldn't take too much stock in the fact that January and February saw very low cancellation rates?
Mr. Chair, I think we still need to, to use Mr. Manconi's words a little bit, we still need to be focused on it and ensure that we're moving in the right direction. These routes and overall the system is very fragile at this point. So I think it's early to say that it's a trend that will continue. We need to keep on it and manage it. And I think the positive steps we've been taking with regards to our use of our strategically deployed resources in terms of our mobile service trucks, our allocated buses and resources. We've been using those much more effectively over the past year, and we've been maxing those out as much as possible to minimize the impact of customers overall. But I do think we just need to stay on it. We need to manage it very, very closely.
Thank you for that answer. So you're saying it's too early to say we've got a trend line, but you're feeling good about the fact that the numbers have gone down, and so we'll see what happens over the next number of months. Okay. My next question is just relating to what gets noted as an official cancellation. So I often hear anecdotal stories of, oh, the bus didn't show up, or the driver told us that he had to go right downtown and wasn't able to stop. And I'm just wondering, it's more of a process question, but to what extent do the official statistics capture all of the cancellations, or are there certain cases where you could actually see a bus not arriving at the appointed time, and for reasons that may make sense, it wouldn't necessarily show up as an official cancellation in the data? So is there a gray category that exists out there?
Mr. Chair, if a trip does not start where it's scheduled to start and end where it's scheduled to end, then it falls into a category. Then we'll have partial cancel trips and complete cancel trips, because sometimes the control center will be able to fill 2/3 of that trip or part of that trip, or the bus will be repaired and we'll be able to complete that trip. The trips that I think the councillor might be thinking of, trips that are delayed but are not cancellations. Let's say there's a route that runs every 10 minutes and one bus is delayed by 12 minutes so that it actually falls behind the trip that it would normally be in front of. So instead of a 10-minute wait, there would be a 20-minute wait for a bus, then there'd be 2 buses that come a couple of minutes apart. That would not show as a cancellation. That would show as a 1 trip running late and 1 trip running on time.
Okay, so in that case, if a driver were to say, you know what, it makes more sense for me to try and get back on schedule, and that driver chooses to sort of accelerate through a number of stops and try and get back on track, the transit user may think that person is not servicing the stop, but that wouldn't show up as a cancellation in that case.
So that decision would be taken not by the operator, but by the control center. If there was a need to, if there was a decision that in that area that trip should be canceled, not operate, and that bus should deadhead to the other end of the line, move out of service in order to put itself back on time, that's a potential source of cancellations. That's a rare strategy for repairing a service like Route 6, 7, or 12.
Okay, I think that's it for me, so thank you very much.
Thanks very much, and I know that everyone will be working to amend routes and planning as if they're successful in their re-elections as we do the TMP in 2019. Quarterly adjustments, you mentioned adding frequency or capacity or reallocating capacity. Given that we're not buying any more buses, where's that extra capacity going to come from?
So quarterly, Pat and his team look at how all routes are performing, and if routes have less occupants than it needs to in terms of justifying the frequency, those routes get redeployed. Also, you have the seasonal shifts with school bus routes and things like that, and those get redeployed.
I think it would be helpful to, if there's going to be infilling of capacity or extra buses or bigger capacity buses put on routes, it would be helpful to understand where they're coming from in the memo that you send as well, just so that we can appreciate how the system is functioning in totality. Thank you very much. Do we have to receive that?
Just before we do that, Mr. Chair, you mentioned it already, but whoever the representatives are after October 22nd for our 3 areas, maybe it's just direction to staff that we continue the dialogue and discussions around the routes, knowing that there will be TMP changes in 2019, as well as, like I alluded to, 2022. There could be some major route changes, reductions in part of routes, changes in some patterns.
So I want to comment on TMP because I've heard that a couple times. I caution you on putting a timeline on the TMP. Because if council decides to proceed with the TMP next term of council, there is a data collection process that needs to occur that takes at least a full year after LRT opening, because you need to stabilize the entire system, and that's just to collect the data, to see travel patterns, and then you need to analyze and so forth. So I'm just commenting because of the timeline on 2019.
No, fair enough. I removed the term 2019, the upcoming TMP.
Yeah, I think that's pretty standard practice, so that's fine. Okay, there are no in-camera items. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, any inquiries? Other business? And our next meeting is Wednesday, the 16th of May. Adjournment? Carried. We're adjourned. Thank you.